I can do this. It is just so uncomfortable. This is so uncomfortable. This is the second proof that was made of my first fantasy book, and I have too many proof copies of too many books and they are taking up too many space. There is no need for me to keep them, but this still just feels really wrong. It's just gonna be one of those things I just gotta rip off the Band-Aid. I just gotta do it. Okay, here we go. Okay. That was a horrible experience. So with the initial discomfort of book destruction out of the way, I can say I got the idea to do this kind of craft project last year and ended up not having time to do it around the holidays. I still need to take the pages out, and while you could definitely just rip them, I wanted clean edges on the paper because another project I want to do will require them. So I use a little hobby knife to cut the pages along the glue of the spine, and that works well, though it is time consuming. I set aside some pages from my favorite scenes for that other project, which I'll probably do later in December. Even though I'm starting the actual writing part of my next epic fantasy book soon, I'm not going to be hitting it full blast like I did when I was writing in August. If I set a goal of 1,000 words of writing each day, I should be done writing the book near the end of February, and that leaves time for actual life and crafts like this. So the book I'm using is Serpent's Mark, and you can see the chapter headers are stars. That's the royal family's crest, and I had this idea to use the pages of this book to make a garland of stars. I initially planned for it to be a 7-pointed star like the emblem in the book, but that proved a little challenging to do, so I settled for 8-pointed stars because those are easy. So to make a star, you just take your book page and fold it in half, then fold that half in half, and fold that half in half. This makes guidelines for where the creases need to be, then you unfold it and use those guidelines to fold the page into an accordion fan kind of thing. The fan should be folded in half to mark where the middle is, and then you staple the middle. My stapler is too short, so I can't reach the middle and need to fold the paper to fit it in there. I find these work better when the staples are straight, so I don't like to go in from the side. Then to make the star shape, you just use scissors and cut the end to a point. You want to make sure the point is not on the side where the paper edge is, or you'll end up with gaps at the tip of your star's points. So cut with the point on the folds, and then when you spread the folds of the fan, you end up with this really pretty star. It also reminds me of a poinsettia or a snowflake, which is nice for this time of year. To get it to stay open, you just take the edges and staple them together. My stapler is a little bulky, so it's hard for me to hold it and staple at the same time, and it takes me some practice to figure out how to hold it well for the stapling, but look how cute this turned out. Now I just have to make a ton more, and I'll punch holes in them to string them up into a garland after I have a bunch made. At first, the idea of tearing up a book to make this kind of craft was sort of mortifying. I am not the sort of person who is comfortable damaging my books. I'm very careful when I read. I don't like to crack the spine or fold any pages. I think part of that comes from being such an enthusiastic patron of libraries growing up. The goal was always to leave a book in perfect condition for the next person. My daughter is like the polar opposite, who dog-ears pages and everything, so if she reads a book, I know she's gonna crack the spine, even if I already made the effort to wake it up. But anyway, I have a lot of books I've written now, and that means I have a lot of proof copies, especially for my early books, where I was less sure of what I was doing and felt a need to get multiple proofs to be sure everything was formatted just right. Now that I've published 20 fantasy books, I'm a little more confident and only get one. But that still leaves me with a proof copy for every book, and I sort of realized last year that I don't need to keep them. I signed some and gave them away to readers as gifts, which they loved because it gave them a chance to see the uncorrected proof and compare it to the final version they got to read. But that still left me with a lot of proof books, and I didn't want to just throw them out. So the idea for the crafts came along: paper star garlands and ornaments, and some decoupage ornaments too. I hated ruining a book at first, but once the pages were out and loose and I got more of these stars made, I started to feel a little more confident about this and started thinking of other ways my proof copies could be repurposed into something else. I know I can use loose pages to be photo backdrops for social media promos and stuff, but I also wanted to be able to do something that would help me enjoy the books in a way that was just joy-focused and not work or advertising focused, and I think these are a good start. After I got all my stars folded and stapled, I grabbed a ribbon to string up a garland of them and did the hole punching. I didn't want them to move too much on the garland, so rather than punching the tip of one point, I punched the top sides of the adjacent points and ran the ribbon through that. I like how this helps them sit a little higher too, so they won't flutter around in a breeze or anything. The ribbon was just a cheap one I'd gotten at the craft store, and I tried to space them out maybe like 10 inches apart on the ribbon, but I love how the garland turned out in the end. I plan on using this on one of my 2 Christmas trees, but I think it will also be a really nice decoration for my library space after the holiday is over, especially since the emblem for this book, and the whole series really, is that 7-pointed star on Faral's pendant. I made more stars than what fit well on the ribbon, but I'll just hang them as regular ornaments here and there on the tree. The next idea I had was for decoupage ornaments. I got these on clearance last year for a whole 50 cents, expecting I'd eventually be able to sit down and decorate them. I'd seen a couple book page ornaments on Pinterest and I was excited to give them a try. So the first one is supposed to be made with circles of paper. And I got this 1-inch circle punch to make the shapes, but I didn't consider that the edges of the paper would make ugly white gaps, so I cut off the page margins before I do any more punching. And then it's just a matter of making a whole lot of circles. Lots and lots of circles. Decoupage is a craft I've never really done, so I got some actual Mod Podge decoupage glue for it, but also some regular school glue in case it doesn't work out right. I figured a cheap paintbrush with plastic bristles would be fine to apply the glue, so that's what I used, and it takes a lot more glue than I expected. The first circle is the hardest one to get on, but the rest are supposed to be layered on kind of like scales. So they go on one layer at a time and are a little easier to get to stick down. It's maybe a little weird, but I really liked doing these projects with Serpent's Mark because that story just means so much to me. Even though it's been done for a few years, the story and its characters have stayed on my mind ever since. There's a sort of side story or spin-off story for that series that I've been considering writing at some point. Something that happens in a time gap between books 4 and 5, but I don't know when I'll actually be able to do it or when it'll be the right time. I've sort of been scratching the itch of revisiting those characters by writing a serialized fluff piece to go along with the end of the last book and posting it raw and unedited on my blog once a month or so. The readers who like the series have messaged me a lot to say they enjoy it, and that's nice. The sense of nostalgia I get from seeing these words on the pages as I'm cutting them up is really nice too. That series was such a huge part of my whole life, and even though I'm a few years separated from it, it still just gives me such a warm feeling to see the story unfold across the pages I took apart. When I pulled out favorite scenes to save for a separate craft, I had to stop myself because I kept being like, oh, I love this scene. Ooh, I love this one too, and this one. But I can't save the whole book for something else. Although I did try to choose less interesting pages to use for these crafts just in case. As if any part of my book is uninteresting to me. Eventually, I made it to the top and I had sort of gotten off track so the layers weren't perfect, but that feels like a metaphor for writing along an outline, so it sort of made me laugh. I love how this ornament turned out, and I think it sort of looks like a pine cone, which makes me think it would be super cute if next time I tea stained the pages first to make them brown. I definitely want to make more of these, and I think they'll be fun to do with my daughter because she loves doing paper crafts. The other ornament idea I saw unfortunately didn't turn out as well. It was one of those things that looked amazing on Pinterest, and then when I actually made it, it was kind of eh. The idea was tearing the book pages into strips along the lines of text and then applying them to the ornament. So I tore a whole bunch of strips, which was harder than I thought it would be. The paper is actually a nice quality, so it didn't want to tear, and then when it did tear, it wanted to be small pieces. So I tore up 2 pages into strips, and then it was time to stick them onto the ornament. Instead of fighting with the brush, I figured I'd just make a mess and do this with my fingers. It was definitely easier and definitely messier. And a funny thing I hadn't anticipated was that as I was doing this, I kept getting distracted by reading the scene on the page I'd torn up and being like, ooh, I love that line, or oh, I love this moment. Even though I've read it at least 100 times across the years it took me to make this book a reality. I don't know, it's just funny. But I'm glad that even though I've come so far since I wrote this series, and I know I am a far better writer now than I was when I did those books, I still look back at it and I can see that I did a good job polishing the work I could do then. There are definitely things I'd do differently now, though I think the biggest one would be allowing myself to make the books longer. They're not small, all of them around 100K, and I think the longest is 120,000 words, but there were so many ideas for scenes that never made it in because I was so ruthless, cutting what wasn't absolutely necessary to the plot. And in retrospect, I'm sad I didn't include them because they didn't move the plot forward, but they did help illustrate character growth and enrich the world building. I've had people say they didn't like that I wrote it with so many POV characters, but that's such a matter of taste. And I don't think I'd do that differently because the goal was to write something like what I'd grown up reading, and it worked well for that story. It obviously doesn't bother everyone because the last Wheel of Time book has, I think, 52 different POV characters. I mean, I'm not Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson, but clearly the fantasy genre as a whole doesn't have so much of a problem with multiple POVs that my dozen or so that I used throughout the course of writing Snake's Blood is a problem. So yeah, if I was doing the books again, I'd make them longer. I'd put back a lot of stuff I cut from my outline because now I see how it could have been valuable. Maybe someday I'll write those segments as little vignettes to share with readers, but for now, I'm just finishing crafts. This one turned out kind of ugly, honestly, and I'm not a big fan, but at least I gave it a try, and sometimes projects like these are a lot like writing. It's a matter of trying something and seeing what doesn't work or what you don't like, and then shaping your work with the stuff you do like. So yeah, I'll be decorating a tree with these. Let me know if you want to see it once it's up and decorated, and I'll see you next time.